And in that moment, like you're a senior and you're like, oh, my next decision is going to define what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But that isn't true.
Yeah, for sure. So UP is indeed a whole experience in and of itself. And of course, like JMA played a big part of that. I joined JMA when I was in second year. So a lot of my college time included involvement with the org. I would say that the biggest thing that my college experience taught me was how to be street smart, and how to confront uncomfortable situations. And then lastly, how to deal with people from all walks of life, from little things like enlisting in classes during registration and like dealing with terror props. For the longest time, I had plans of becoming a lawyer. And I'd say that was largely driven by like family expectations. Pretty common thing, I think, in Filipino Asian culture. So I kind of like blindly went down that path despite so many warning signs. So like in high school, I joined debate. I hated it. I actually studied BA. I absolutely dreaded business law, which is like a subject in my third year. So anyway, there were all these warning signs, but I kind of like kept the blinders on and I was like, no, gotta go for it. So like fourth year, I studied for the LAE, took the LAE, got accepted into UP Law. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was like, I can't. So I finally confronted my fear, mainly of disappointing my family. And I made that decision and told them that I wasn't going to go to law school. So I didn't have anything lined up. And so when I decided that I wasn't going to do it, I guess I was kind of like, well, I guess now I can do anything, which ended up working for the best, I guess. And I had gone to an entrepreneurship conference in San Francisco my junior year and got some exposure to like the tech scene and startups. And I was like, oh, maybe I can do that. There's definitely a culture shock moving there after graduation and actually not having any family in the area. It was definitely like a big change. One of the big changes was definitely like small talk in the States. So, like, I'll never forget, like, when I went to work one day and one of my colleagues was like, hey, how are you? And I like start telling her how I feel and she's like walking away. And then I'd say like work-wise, one big change was like how in the States, I feel like it's a good thing to like speak up and like challenge your manager. Let's say if you like don't agree with something. Whereas in the Philippines, in my limited work experience, I'd say my only work experience in the Philippines was an internship in Nestle my junior year. But generally, you're just like not supposed to challenge people in authority or people who are superior to you. But in the States, it's actually like a good thing if you're able to like bring your own ideas and like thoughts to the table. The biggest difference is definitely like the independence and the responsibilities that come with it. So when I moved to the US, I felt like I was a baby, like trying to figure out all the most basic things that like my family just had always taken care of, right? Like you move into your own apartment and you're like, oh, I have to like clean. Like I moved into an apartment and I wasn't happy with like the cleanliness of the bathroom. So I just like cleaned the whole thing and like cleaned out the fridge and all the small things. Yeah, like buying groceries, cooking a meal for yourself. Yeah, I guess that was the biggest change, just like having to do everything yourself. Yeah, so I definitely experienced homesickness, especially in my first year. That was a really difficult transition, going from like being in college and being surrounded by your closest friends every day in university, being able to go home every weekend and just have my family there, to suddenly being like in a foreign country with no family, no friends, and like trying to figure out life. And then what made it worse was that everyone else was back home. So like, like post college, all my friends were like getting together for happy hour after work and like sharing all those common experiences. And I was kind of just like, oh, like I don't have any friends that I can meet post work. Like most of my friends really early on were like my work friends, which are great, but like it's different from like having those like old friends. It took some time to find like a support system. But after a year or so, like I found a friend group and that really helped a lot. And then at work as well, like from a professional perspective, like finding mentors at work was really helpful. So like I had one mentor at work who like helped me to grow as a designer, which was my eventual role at the company that I was at. And then I had like another friend / mentor who like helped me all around, like whether that was like negotiating my salary or like telling me how much air to pump into my tire. I'll never forget like my first year there. Like this is like so sad. On my birthday, I moved to the States in May. My birthday was like in August. And I was like, what do I want for my birthday? And I was like, I just want friends. But I guess that's part of it. Public transportation. So I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, but not in the city. So public transportation is really good in the city, but outside of the city, it's horrible. So I lived in Palo Alto, which is like an hour from San Francisco. So for example, like from my apartment to work, it would either take like a 15-minute drive or an hour on the bus. And you had to like switch to like get there. So very quickly, like I got my job like within a month of moving to the States. So you can only imagine kind of like that tight timeline. I had to like buy a car and figure out like, how do you buy a car? And oh my gosh, learning how to drive was a really big thing too. Cause like driving in the States on like the highway system is so different from driving in Manila. Like I had driven in Manila maybe like for a sem and a half before moving to the States. And that's where like I learned and got practice, but like just the style of like, trying to get through Manila traffic. I actually like failed my driver's test twice. When I took my driving exam in Manila, I just had to drive around a parking lot. But then it's real. So, yeah, that was really difficult. I failed twice and I was like, I need to get my license because I need to drive to work. So in terms of budgeting, I would say that for the one kind of like big thing that I did early on, which I think helped me a lot, was to be very meticulous about expense tracking. My first job in the States was an internship, so it didn't really pay that much, but I had my own bills to pay. I had a car at that point. So I remember like my first month there, like I just had a spreadsheet with like all the money that was coming in and all the money that was going out. Really detailed expense tracking just gives you visibility into like how you're spending and allows you to be more disciplined. And like, it just like gives you the data so that you can make better decisions rather than kind of like just looking at your account and being like, oh yeah, I have money to spend or I don't have money to spend. And so that's one thing. And then the second thing, when you start earning more money, then you have money to save. And so one big thing that I wanted to share that helped me a lot was doing automatic savings. So from every paycheck, I would like automatically put away like X dollars or X amount into my savings account before anything else. I think that's the best part about living abroad is just how it broadens your perspective. Like by being in a new environment and by being surrounded by different types of people, there's just like so much you learn about the place and about yourself in that experience. The Bay Area was a really great place too because it's so like culturally diverse. So you do get exposure to lots of like different types of people. It's also really empowering to be able to survive and eventually thrive on your own. After overcoming like all those speed bumps, now it's like, oh, like I say that like what my experience in California gave me the confidence. It's like, oh, if I was able to figure out how to set up life from like zero, from nothing, in this place, then I can probably do it again. But yeah, so I'd say that, and then I eventually like made friends who, you know, I now like consider family, which is really great that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Living in San Francisco is also really, I guess, like talking about like the fun things. It's such a popular destination, so a lot of friends, like old friends, actually came through, and would like when they would visit the States, they typically come to San Francisco. So then it's cool to like now be a local and be able to like show them the city, and show them different places. And then my family would visit. Like my sister visited me a few times. Like my Lolo and my Tita did like a 2-week trip, and I kind of like got to show them around, because it's like, yeah, like this is my new home. And so that was really cool. And then traveling within the States is super easy. So like definitely did a lot of trips to different states and like road trips and all that stuff. Yeah. Oh, so many. I guess like, so one big thing, you know how like I was telling you that one of the big, like my big wake up call was that I needed to become a more like independent thinker. And I felt like for a long time, a lot of my decisions were basically like, oh, I need to do this because this is what my family like expects of me. And I feel like that's really common. In like in Eastern culture, where it's like, you know, you do things for like the good of your family, which is great and has its own like benefits, and I can see the value in that. And then you move to like the States and you kind of see like the opposite extreme, where it's like very much like they value like the individual, and it's more individualistic versus like collectivist. And so like that's one example where I'm like, oh, I get exposure to people who like deeply think this way. Yeah. So after living in California for about 5 years, I was kind of itching to explore more of the world, I guess. And so at the time, I was running a web design business with my then boyfriend, who's now my husband.
Oh wow!
And after running that for about a year and a half in California, we realized that like we could run the business. Everything was done remotely. Like we never met with any of our clients. So we were like, oh, this is like a great opportunity. Like we could totally do this from anywhere in the world.
Wow.
And so we decided that it would be a great time, or we had a great setup so that we could kind of like travel slowly and experience places for extended periods of time. So we kind of planned that out for like a year. And then in 2018, we like picked up, we sold no, we didn't own an apartment. We sold our cars, got rid of our lease, basically got rid of everything. And we initially planned to travel for a year. So we like brainstormed and like kind of listed out places that we wanted to experience just culturally out of curiosity. And then had to, of course, do like a check to make sure that they had good infrastructure so that we could continue to work. So for that first year, we lived in a new city every month. So we actually started our journey in Chiang Mai, Thailand, spent a month there. We went to Bali, Tokyo, Berlin, Porto. After like month 7, we got tired. Turns out, like if you're vacationing for a month in a place, that's a lot of time. But if you're actually living, 1 month is really short, because you have to figure out like all the small day-to-day things of like, where do you do your groceries? How do you do your laundry? Where do I work? Exercise, all those things. So it was pretty hectic. So after that, we decided to slow down our travels and stay in a place for about 2 to 3 months at a time. So we then continued. We went back to Thailand. We did Taiwan, Colombia. And then at the end of year 2, we were like, we were kind of at a crossroad where we were trying to figure out like, oh, should we go back to the States? Our parents are always like, when are you going to settle down? You're like almost 30. What's your plan in life? And we were really enjoying it. We hadn't at that point identified a city that we wanted to go back to in the States. But then we also kind of wanted to slow down even more. And then we eventually, we found like a long-term visa that we could apply to in Portugal, which is where I am now. So we applied to that. We got to Portugal last year, and then COVID hit. So we've been here a year now. And it's, I guess, slowly becoming kind of like our second home. Definitely a balance, because we're still working. Like we still run our web design business. and always working on like other like fun, like projects on the side. So I'd say that we work like full time pretty much. It is nice though that we work for ourselves, so we do have that flexibility. Like we don't need to be like on the computer from 9 to 5 every day. Like sometimes maybe, and this is actually great, we'll go to attractions on a weekday because that's when it's not crowded. We've actually made a lot of good friends. It was really interesting because when we first decided to do it, we exactly had that mindset where we were like, I guess it's just going to be the two of us for this upcoming year. So we started in Chiang Mai, Thailand, which turns out to be like a really popular destination for digital nomads. And like you go to a coffee shop and there are just like a bunch of people also on their laptops, and you strike up a conversation and there's like a lot more, there are a lot of commonalities between us, surprisingly. So yeah, I'd say that over the years we've met some good friends, and because a lot of these people are nomadic, you'll sometimes like meet people in one place and then see them in like another country.
So Thailand specifically, Chiang Mai is the city. I really like that place because it's such a popular destination for other nomads and others like similar people. So it's really easy to make friends, because that's one thing, like when you're living in a place and not just there for like, you know, when your day-to-day isn't booked with like sights to see and things to do, like you're really just living there. And so having a community is really important. So Taiwan, I'd say one of the biggest kind of like things that put that high on the list is the food. And then the internet, like it's just like really conducive for working. And I think that I just had like a really positive experience in Taiwan, because when we lived there, we lived with like one of our friends who we met from like our earlier travels. And then we had like a good friend group in that city as well. My last one is Portugal. I'd say that my experience in Portugal is probably a bit weird, given that like a majority of it was during COVID. But it's a good place, you know, like it's really easy living. Like the weather's good. It's like really sunny. People are really friendly, even though I don't speak, like I barely speak any Portuguese. They're like really patient and they'll like try to understand. The food, like, yeah, the produce is really good. So that's been great for like cooking. It's easy to get around. I don't know, it's just like really comfortable place. Living in Asia definitely feels like familiar. Well, I don't know, I guess they're both familiar now. And maybe that's why it's hard for me to kind of like explain the differences, because I feel pretty comfortable in both now. It's like kind of fluid, because now it's kind of just like, oh, in this place, this is how it's done, versus in this place, this is how it's done. Well, it's definitely noticeable here in Portugal. I think Portugal, like the Mediterranean, like European countries are definitely more chill. So I think that they're closer to like, or it's like very different. There's actually a very stark difference between the pace of work here in Portugal versus the US. Like US is very like, you know, very efficient. They're very on top of it. Like, I was just talking to a friend yesterday. She's German, and she was kind of like commenting on the kind of like the pace in Portugal, where like, you know, in the grocery store, they like take their time. It's like, you know, it's just like chill. It's like they really enjoy life, which is great. It's just different. I'd say that a lot of my experience in Asia is also in like Southeast Asia is pretty relaxed as well. Tokyo, I think, is the closest to the feeling. I get the same feeling in Tokyo and the States, where it's like really like efficient. Well, one thing that I'll have to tell you is that because I was in your shoes too, and in that moment, you know, like you're a senior and you're like, oh, my next decision is going to define what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But that isn't true. Of course, you like make the best decision that you can given the information that you have. But I think that it's important to know that you can always change your mind, and that you can always learn new skills, or you can always shift into like a different industry if you want in the future, and you're not locked into like the first decision that you make.